we're together to worship God and remember the ways in which God calls out to us come out. I want to give thanks to Peggy for her creative storytelling gifts and invite all of us to share our gifts in different ways during our time of worship and time of community here at CCUMC. I want to pause for a second before we unwrap that story some more, and I almost want to keep all of things up and think maybe I could do it, but I think I would start dropping things and I would not be so graceful and I would not be so calm as I sifted through all of my things. So I may need a prop and some help, Peggy, later on. But as mentioned earlier by Ari, the season of Lent actually is coming to a close. We're in the 5th week of Lent, and Lent next week is the 6th week, the last week of Lent or in Lent, and then we enter Easter. And so I want to pause for a moment to do a check-in about our Lenten journeys. Ari certainly did say that we are on a journey with Jesus, not only through his compassion, but through his suffering. And so it behooves us to pause and think for a moment what that journey has been like and what it's been about together. At the beginning of Lent, you all saw these questions, I hope. They came in the form of a purple sheet when you came, or a gray sheet if you came to Ash Wednesday service, or a purple sheet in the pews for the first couple of weeks. But these 3 questions were raised for us to consider individually as how to form and shape our Lenten journeys. The first question asks, what will you give up? What might you commit to giving up as an act of repentance and turning back to God, right? And I hope we talked a little bit about this isn't just like, I always hear this every single year, right? I always hear, oh, I'm going to give up chocolate, right? For some reason, that's like the biggest thing that people always mention, chocolate or candies or whatever it is. And that may be true for you, but we want to recognize that that's not truly true for everybody. And we should be thinking about our giving up as an act of repentance, not as like a deprivation for ourselves, right? So you might think about what are the things that are blocking my way to the holy? For some, it might be our getting lost in use of the internet or email or Facebook or texting, I don't know, whatever it is, right? For some of us, it's TV watching. Some of us, it's gossiping, right? Some of it, it's negative self-talk. We have this conversation going on in our head all the time so that we do not see ourselves as the children of God. So what is it that you chose to give up as a way of turning back, returning to the side and presence of God? The second question was, what might you take on, right? As an act of putting yourself, nurturing and committing yourself to spiritual growth and nourishment. Now, again, that always is a wide thing too, right? For me, it's running. It's committing to go running and getting into my body. Some of you might say, Emily, that's about your exercise and that has nothing to do with your spirituality. I would beg to differ, right? For some of you, you might say, well, I'm going to take on something more traditional, something like, I'm going to pray. Or I want to say the Lord's Prayer every day. Or it could be something as crazy as, I'm going to take that tap dancing class over at Wasam, right? Because what it is about getting in touch with joy. And that would grow my spirit. The third question is, what community need will you give special attention to as an act of solidarity and generosity? And so it's really about opening your heart to the ways in which God is present in the world, that God weeps and God's heart hurts, and entering that along with God and committing to it. So you might be thinking, wait, I don't remember seeing these questions, right? You might be thinking that now. Or you might be thinking, yeah, I saw those questions, but I never actually took time to answer them, right? Or you might be like, I answered them, but I haven't done nothing about it, right? Or you might be, I'm on it. Doesn't matter, friends, it doesn't matter. This time is about checking in and just talking through these questions again so that we might get back onto the Lenten journey. So I want to invite you to maybe just be in a group of 2 or 3, not form a bigger group than 3, okay? And to take a moment just to share. If you want to share one thing you committed to and how it's been, right? Something you've noticed or that you've learned. And if you're like one of the cases of like this is the first time you're seeing these questions or you didn't answer, just share what's been true for you as you hear these questions. Okay? So just share. And if you really come down to it and need to pass, that's never a problem. All right? So I'm going to look at the time, and we're literally going to take 3 minutes to do this. All right? So find 2 or 3 people. You can move around the whole sanctuary, so it is a-okay to find folks that you don't know or you haven't talked with. But move around, move around. Join the ladies, Bert. Join the ladies. Oh, no? Or here, as you like, as you like. Good morning. Good morning. Hey, good morning. So just to let you know, we're just talking about First Peter. Good morning. Sandy, welcome. Cindy, Emily. Nice to meet you. You have about 30 more seconds, so make sure you invite other folks to share if they haven't already. If you would find a good pausing spot. You want to stay where you are or go back to your original seat. Either way is okay. Time is up. Ed, were you getting into it? Nice. I like it. I appreciate that. So I hope that time was a time of rich sharing, and I hope that it was a sense of opening, right? I think there's a lot of frustration often. It's like you're just getting into it, and you're like, oh, I just realized, wow, there's so much more to talk about. And I hope that really is an introduction to remember that these are the kinds of conversations that you're invited to all the time. When you're coming to church, it doesn't only have to be, hey, Jonathan, how are you this past week? It can also be, how's your Lenten journey going, and what are those commitments that you've made with each other and what's happening for you? So I do pray that as we enter into these final 2 weeks of the Lenten season, that you might find yourselves drawn again back onto the way with Jesus. And that you might find that the commitments you made or the things that are inkling and nudgings in your heart are things that will bring you to a place where God will reveal herself to you in surprising yet joyful ways. Last week, if you remember, we encountered the story of Jesus with who? A man born blind, right? A man born blind, and all the ways in which we experience blindness. That's sort of what we talked about. If you remember, the story did not end happily, despite the healing, right? Especially for Jesus. Because part of what happened was that as he extended this healing, the grumbling and the unhappiness in the community started growing. Were we to read the chapter between last week, chapter 9, and this week, chapter 11, we'd learn that Jesus' life actually has become endangered, and that now he has left the city of Jerusalem and made his way across the Jordan River, we read, teaching and healing there, and generally trying to stay out of the way of people who are out to get him. He stays there across this river until he receives a message from Mary and Martha about their brother, Lazarus. We get a sense as Peggy lifted up that these were dear, dear friends of Jesus. After all, the message that comes to him, according to the scripture writer, says, "Lord, the one whom you love is ill." Yet strangely, this doesn't seem to move Jesus, right? He doesn't sort of like get out the suitcase immediately or whatever it is that they used back in the day and pack it up and start going. He doesn't check the schedule of the Camel Express to see if it can take him there faster. He actually says something quite strange and maybe even a little bit disturbing to us. He seems to see something that we can't see, and so he waits. He waits for 2 more days. It would be important to remember that Mary, Martha, and Lazarus live in the town of Bethany, a town that's 2 short miles from the city of Jerusalem, 2 short miles from the plots and the anger of those who wished to stone Jesus. This means, I hope you realize, that by going to Lazarus, Jesus is actually walking closer and maybe into the midst of danger. When Jesus finally does arrive in Bethany, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days and has long been buried. Sort of interesting to note that for the community there was this belief that for the first 3 days after death, your spirit sort of hovered over the body. But after that, there would be no hope of sort of reuniting the two. So the emphasis that 4 days has passed has meant that not only is the body in the tomb, but the spirit, the soul, has also departed already. We read that Jesus, encountering the grief of Mary and the gathered mourners, is greatly disturbed in his spirit and begins, as Ari mentioned earlier, also to weep. He's led to the tomb of Lazarus, a cave sealed by a rock, where once the rock is removed, he prays and then cries out, "Lazarus, come out." I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to imagine that moment, right? If you are the gathered folks there, there's the cave, there's the stone moved away, and this loud voice and prayer that happens, I don't know what I would be expecting. But the story goes that here comes Lazarus, completely wrapped head to toe, even his face covered, out from the cave. And once he's out, Jesus has one more thing to say to those gathered. Unbind him and let him go. In our Lenten scriptures, these past series, we've been reminded that the work of Jesus is to bring new birth. You remember that midnight conversation that Jesus had with Nicodemus about being born from above, being born of water and spirit? We've also been reminded that the work of Jesus is to quench our thirst. Remember noontime, the heat was on, it was so hot, and yet there was Jesus at the well with the Samaritan woman, and he promised her to give her living water. We were reminded last week that the work of Jesus is to restore and heal blindness. Physically, yes, right? Wendy was so sweet to remind us that of all the people blind, the blind man was blind, right? So we were promised that the work of Jesus is to restore ourselves physically, but spiritually of our blindness, most definitely. This encounter with Lazarus reminds us that the work of Jesus is to bring life. Not just ordinary ho-hum life, friends. Not just life where things are okay, I'm making it through, but, things could be better. Not life that I say every week, wow, nothing really special happened. Not life where you're breathing and walking, but barely anything else. But the promise is that Jesus brings life abundant, he calls it, life joyful, life resurrected, life whole, and life healed. This encounter with Lazarus reminds us that where there is death, be it in relationships, things that aren't working between people, be it death in connections, be it death of possibility of our imagination or of hope, and that where we are entombed, sealed by a rock in the cave, by perhaps addictions, by blindness, by fear in our heart, by our playing small, by habits and behaviors, really, that do not serve us any longer. In those places where there's death and where we are entombed, Jesus stands at the door and calls out, loud and clear, friends. That's what the gospel writer said. Come out. It's interesting, I've always sort of struggled with understanding resurrection. Because for me, it's always, reading the stories, there's always this question of like, physically resurrected? And I start going down that road of like, how does that happen? I mean, I can kind of imagine blindness, like that would be a miracle, right? But resurrection, I don't know. But it's when we start talking about all the ways that we do indeed experience death and entombment in our lives, the ways that that happens spiritually and in relationship, that I do get resurrection. So all the ways that Jesus calls us out of the places of death and entombment, we can give thanks and pray that the courage to rise and walk out into the sunlight is within us. But the work of restoration is incomplete, friends, right? We might be celebrating already, clapping our hands. Wow, there's Lazarus coming out of the tomb. But the reality is that he is completely bound up. And so even as he stands there trapped in all of these pieces of cloth, Jesus' next command is to all of us who stand there and witness this resurrection. Jesus' command is to unbind him and let him go. We might pause to remember last week's story of the man born blind, right? When he's healed, the community does not unbind him. Remember? They don't even believe it's him. They don't even believe he's healed. They get all up into it. That's an example of how we refuse to unbind even when the miracle of healing and resurrection is in our presence. Some months ago, I think it was, I learned of the Lazarus effect that Ari shared about in her welcome and opening. For those of you who weren't here at the beginning, the Lazarus effect is a term used to describe the amazing and dramatic effect that taking these things called antiretroviral drugs has on HIV/AIDS patients. I had to practice that word several times last night, antiretroviral. And so now I'm just going to say ARV, okay? Okay? So the way that this has such a dramatic, literally, people go from the edge of death back into functioning life. And if you can imagine it, right? These adults that are at the edge of death, this is affecting their families, this is affecting their ability to go to or not go to school, to work, to care for those around them. So when somebody comes back to life, it's not just about their resurrection. Often it's about their family and their community's resurrections. We know that antiretroviral drugs have become much more affordable around the world. About 10 years ago, to take a year's worth of this drug cost each patient about $10,000. Imagine the cost of this sort of medication. Today, 10, 11 years later, that cost has gone down to 40 cents a day, or about $140 a year. We also know that while many more folks have access to these medications, still 4,900 people die every day from HIV/AIDS. So if we can imagine, right, 4,000, is that the size of your high school? That's even bigger. That's the size of sort of small colleges, I would guess, disappearing off of the map every day. 3/4 of those deaths happen in sub-Saharan Africa, where of course we know Uganda is. So today, on what some people are calling Lazarus Sunday, right, churches around the world have been invited to share a word about this Lazarus effect, this contemporary vision and manifestation of being resurrected back to life, and being prompted to consider what it might look like to become a part of the unbinding community that's needed so that our brothers and sisters living with HIV and AIDS can experience the resurrection. So I want to close today with just this short clip. Unfortunately, we do have copies if you would like to watch this 30-minute documentary. But for now, I'd like to invite us to watch this clip. You'll see just a quick vision of a couple people talking about it, but there's an invitation also. So I wonder if we might turn off one side of our lights. Thank you, Richard, as we go. And we want to make sure our volume is ready to go. And so let's take a look. Can you go a little bit louder?
With HIV, I've gone through a lot. In my life, I've had 3 children. And I've lost all 3 children to HIV.
Onapo bantu bakwe bati bakumwa bapola so naine wamene nichetekera nizapola.
The way I was feeling in me, it was like I was already dead. And I never had any hope that again I would come back to life. And after I started my medication, it was like I was being resurrected from the bed that I was sleeping in. I'm ready to take my medication for the rest of my life. For the sake of my daughter, I want to see my daughter growing. I want to see my daughter maybe also getting married so that I could be celebrating as a mother.
Oh, 'cause blue skies are coming, but I know that it's hard.
So I hope that that's a teaser for you to want to watch this video and learn more about this issue. One thing that I notice is that they make very clear they're not asking you for your money, right? They're asking you for your voice. They're asking for you to become a part of the unbinding. For those of us who are struggling with death in this moment, may we be reminded that God stands at the opening of all of our tombs, shouting, "Come out!" May our hearts be strengthened with courage to step into God's light. And for those of us who are part of witnessing the miracle of resurrection happening in those around us, may we, with great gentleness and care, and even a measure of courage also, partner with God in completing the work of resurrection and strip away all that keeps our brothers and sisters bound and trapped. And may it be that we all experience that life that Jesus promised. Life whole, life complete, life freed, and life healed.